the computer. Thank you. All right, at the 1 minute at 2 o'clock, I will start your webinar. Okay, the webinar has started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Office of Community Services Division of Energy Assistance webinar about LIHEAP use of funds, allowable activities, and flexibilities. My name is Caroline Kazmarski, and I'm a program specialist here with LIHEAP. Before we start today's presentation, we just want to share a brief video with you all as we wait for others to join the call today.
Sometimes it's difficult to keep our home cool in the summer as temperatures and energy costs rise. When I was struggling to pay my cooling bills, I knew the extreme heat was especially dangerous for my mother and young children. But the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, helped us beat the heat. LIHEAP helps me and 6 million other households lower our energy bills each year through bill payments and crisis assistance, which can prevent service interruptions. In some cases, LIHEAP might also provide additional assistance with services like repair or replacement of AC units, minor home repairs, and weatherization advice from an energy auditor. LIHEAP helped create a cool and safe environment for my family, and they could do the same for you. To get help with your energy bill or other home cooling needs, visit www.energyhelp.us or call 1-866-674-6327.
So welcome again, everybody. We're excited to have you here with us today. We hope you enjoyed that video.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I just want to echo Caroline's welcome to today's webinar on LIHEAP allowable activities and flexibilities. So as you all know, LIHEAP is a block grant, meaning grant recipients have flexibility and latitude in designing your program. Grant recipients can create policies and program parameters based on your community needs. Additionally, as needs may arise within your community, you have the flexibility to make changes throughout the federal fiscal year. These flexibilities and more are what we want to take time to discuss today. And I know the team has a lot to cover today, so I won't take up any more time, but I do want to say thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you as always for the work that you do to serve those in need every day. With that, I will turn it over to Akam and the team.
Thank you, Megan. Today we have got our Division of Energy Assistance team ready to discuss the many ways LIHEAP funds can be used. Next slide, please. Take a look at the screen to see photos of our team members. They are here. It's good to put faces to the names you have been in touch with regarding the program. We are here to add that personal touch and help you with any questions you might have about running LIHEAP day to day. Plus, we want you to know who your specific program specialist is if you need to reach out. Let's move on to the next slide. Here we go. I'm excited to introduce our 3 new program specialists and their regions today. You will receive additional communication from our office. First of all, Shamir Hansen has joined us and will cover regions 6 and 7 states and tribes. Next, Sarah Dalglish is transitioning from LIHEAP, the Water Assistance Program, to handle LIHEAP for regions 5 and 10. Caroline Kekmarski, you have seen her already previously with the OCS Office of Director, will be focusing on regions 1 and 10 states. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Another announcement. After 2 years, our Economic Mobility Fellowship is wrapping up. During that time, they not only served as program specialists, but also conducted research on LIHEAP, focusing on cooling assistance and weatherization. Thanks to Brianna, Claudia, and Francesca. Next slide, please. Finally, I also want to acknowledge and thank the DA team who put together today's presentation, especially Heather, Kate, Vicky, Doris, Nancy, and Sarah, and a special thanks to Caroline for moderating today's webinar. Next, move on to the next slide, please. Okay. So as you heard from Megan, LIHEAP offers a range of flexibilities under its statutes and regulations. First, I wanted to remind everyone about the 16 assurances. They do provide a broad spectrum of flexibilities. Also, there is the clearly erroneous provision under 45 CFR. Your model plan serves as the LIHEAP application. You all know that to our office, outlining how you are actually implementing LIHEAP at your state, territory, or local levels. That's why gathering public input in your program design is crucial for this. Finally, we expect our grant recipient to treat LIHEAP as carefully as they would treat their own program. While your rules can be more stringent, they can be more lenient than federal rules. Considering these LIHEAP flexibilities, it is critical to think about needs assessment, participant data, lived experience, and partnership at all levels. We can't stress enough that partnership at the local, state, and national level is important for your program design. I hope today's information helps our grant recipient maintain a strong home energy assistance program through LIHEAP. Next, I will hand over to Kate Thomas for the next round of presentation. She will take a deeper dive into our first topic. Kate?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you today to talk about the importance of modifying your LIHEAP benefit matrix and the income limits in your energy assistance program. So you may call your program LIHEAP, HEAP, LIHEAP, or something else entirely. But the most important thing to note about your LIHEAP funded program is that you have many flexibilities in designing and changing your program. One flexibility you have as a grant recipient of the LIHEAP block grant is to change your LIHEAP benefit matrix and LIHEAP income threshold as the need arises. And one of those needs is to do it annually as you are statutorily required. But there are other times you might want to change your matrix and or your income limits, and we'll get into that. Next slide, please. So we're going to put a poll up here. Would you rather serve more people with a smaller benefit or fewer people with a larger benefit? If you could select one of the answers on the screen, we'll get a gauge of how everyone feels about this question in their program. And I know Sarah's running the poll for us. So Sarah, I actually can't see the results, but when you feel like the answers are slowing, feel free to close it. Okay. So here's the responses. We have 68% with more people with a smaller benefit and 24% with the other. The results closed on me, so I'm sorry. I couldn't. There we go. 24% fewer people with a larger benefit and 7% with other. Okay, great. So you can go on to the next slide there. There was no incorrect answer to that question. Some people, would rather, maybe some people have selected other because they're trying to find that sweet spot of using your LIHEAP award to serve as many people as you can with the benefit amount that you've determined to be impactful. As stated earlier, since LIHEAP's a block grant, that's a decision that your state, tribe, or territory must make. And I believe, let's see, we may need to go forward one slide. There we go. Thank you. So here are some other reasons to change your benefit matrix and or the income limits for your LIHEAP. The first reason is because it's required of you at least once a year, and most of you have already referenced the information memorandum that our office published in March, the federal poverty guidelines and state median income estimates for optional use in federal fiscal year 2024, but mandatory for this upcoming fiscal year 2025. Or perhaps you referenced another source with the same information. And you must update your matrix annually with the new income guidelines. And you can choose either the federal poverty guidelines or the state median income estimates or a combination of the two. But the other reasons are more optional. And the second reason on this list is an expenditures trends. So perhaps it's June and you're looking at how much you've expended this year compared to last year's expenditures at this point in time. And you notice that you've spent or drawn down or just even obligated way less than you did at this point in the previous fiscal year at this time. So last year, maybe you'd drawn down, let's say 80% of your award by now, and this year you're only at 40%. And that's a big difference. So you might want to change your benefit matrix or your income limits now to adjust to that. And then number 3 on the list is sort of the opposite may be true. The opposite may be a reality for some of you. Perhaps you've obligated, expended, or drawn down 95% of your award already at this point in time. And last year at this time, you were only at 60 or 70% in June. You might want to stretch your dollars because you're running out of money. So you might want to consider lowering your benefit amounts or income limits. And the fourth reason on this list is that the needs in your area have changed. An example of this is that you're having an extremely brutal summer with heat waves you haven't seen in your area in a long time. So you might want to provide higher cooling benefits instead of carrying over 10% as you had planned. So you're going to move some of that money to a LIHEAP cooling component and change the matrix to reflect that. Number 5 on this list, disaster. If a tornado or flooding or an ice storm or some other extreme weather event, for instance, impacts your area, you might want to consider changing your matrix to address those circumstances. And my colleague Nancy will go over some more information about that shortly. Number 6 on the list is legislation. How many of you have a state or tribal or territory law about your income limits? I know that's something that some of our grant recipients have to contend with, and if the lawmaking body in your area makes that a statutory requirement that you use a certain income level, then that might be something that you have to change in your matrix or your income limits. Number 7 on this list is a change in home energy prices. Maybe a spike in energy prices occurs and you want to change your matrix to account for that. Perhaps propane has surged, or electric has outpaced the price of natural gas in your area, or vice versa. Maybe you need to account for that in your matrix. And lastly, you might want to change your program to adjust to new funds, like when we've issued supplemental funds or ARPA funds or CARES or IIJA. Whenever we issue additional supplemental funds in addition to your regular annual LIHEAP block grant funding, you might need to adjust your matrix or your income limits to account for that. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list. There may be other reasons to change your matrix or income limits. And regardless of when or how you do that, you cannot exceed the greater of 60% of state median income or 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. Okay. Great. So now we are going to talk about this section of the statute known as Assurance 5. It basically means you must consider income, household size, and energy cost or energy needs in your benefit matrix. That's basically what we refer to as your benefit matrix. You do have the flexibility in defining what energy cost or energy needs are. Energy prices, energy burden, prices by fuel type, regional variations, climate zones. Those are all examples of the energy need that you might incorporate into your matrix. And let me just go back here. Perfect. Okay, so this is a few other examples that you might want to consider and reasons you might want to adjust your matrix or your income caps. First, take a look at your categorical eligibility policy. Consider if you're deeming any population eligible for LIHEAP because they receive SNAP or TANF or SSI or a means-tested veterans program. Maybe you want to include one or more of these categories in the future. Second, take a look at your documentation requirements. Is there anything that you can remove to help streamline applications and reduce burden on the applicants? Or do you need to add additional documents so you can change your matrix perhaps? Countable income is defined by you as the grant recipient, and you have choices such as to use gross or net income. You can exclude certain income sources, allow for recertifications for fixed income households, for instance, with customer attestations, self-attestations for zero income, etc. So there's, various documentation requirements that may impact your benefit matrix and income limits decisions. Third, look at your arrearage management policies and how high you can go to pay past due bills. Are you paying past due bills and paying arrearages? Up to how much? Is it too high or not high enough? Those are considerations. And fourth, look at priority populations. So this is also a great time to look at that category as you're developing your plan for 2025. Look at what populations you prioritize. You're strongly encouraged to prioritize senior citizens, young children, and the disabled. You might want to consider additional priority groups such as pregnant women or veterans. And these are factors you might want to include in some way on your benefit matrix. So now I'm going to hand it over to our next presenter, Doris Callejas. Thank you for your time today, and please pop any questions you might have into the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get to those at the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Today, I'll cover the sections on avoiding reallotment and going over the different flexibilities LIHEAP grant recipients have to avoid reallotment. I want to remind everyone that even though through this process, funds are redistributed to the grant recipients, these funds belong to the low-income households, and reallotment deprives households from receiving the maximum possible benefit in the years funds were awarded. We don't want funds back. We want to ensure that they stay with the households that need them the most. So later we'll discuss what options you have to do this. Next slide, please. But before we get into that, we'll go ahead and take a poll question. Do you know if your state, territory, or tribe is on track to timely obligate at least 90% of your FY24 LIHEAP award by 9/30 of this year? And by obligation, we mean a commitment of funding in a specific amount to a specific entity within a specific date, like a contract, using your own definition of obligation, of course. And we can go ahead and see, I'm looking at the poll right now. Wonderful, wonderful. So it looks like 96% responded that yes, they're on track to obligate funds. That is wonderful. We can go ahead and stop this. And 4% answer no. So if you answer yes, you're probably one of those grant recipients that's eager to receive more funding. We really appreciate your efforts. And for those of you who answer no, pay close attention to the flexibilities you can implement now to avoid realignment, which we'll go into detail shortly. But before we do that, let's talk about what is reallotment. As stated in the LIHEAP statute, all LIHEAP awards have a 2-year obligation period. In the first year, 90% of all funds awarded in that fiscal year must be obligated, and only up to 10% can be carried over to be obligated in the second year. Any unobligated funds are subject to reallocation among all grant recipients in the next federal fiscal year. The amount of reallotment is based on the figures reported by each grant recipient in their carryover and reallotment report and their federal financial reports. So currently, we are in the process of finalizing the final reallocation amount from FY23. These unobligated funds will go out to the grant recipients later this fiscal year before September 30th. And to ensure your concerns are addressed and no errors were made, we have issued a 30-day notice to receive comments from all grant recipients who reported reallotment. The Federal Register notice should be published in the next few days, which has a list of all the grant recipients who reported reallotment. So we strongly encourage all of you to provide comments on that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now let's delve into the concept of reallotment over the years. Going back to 10 years, reallotments were between $700,000 and $800,000. As we can see from the graph here, over the last 4 or 5 years, these numbers have become trendy. In FY 2020, we were under $1 million, and over the years, this has been increasing. Last year, we reallotted over $17 million, and this year, we are looking at almost the same figure. This increase can be attributed to several factors. Some of the reasons we hear from grant recipients can range from, I was not aware of all the funds awarded to our state, tribe, or territory until it was too late to obligate. I was unable to obligate funds due to challenging state rules for contract implementation, or we were short-staffed, therefore unable to process the same number of applications we processed last year. And just to let you know, when you report reallotment in the carryover and reallotment report, there is a section that asks why you couldn't obligate funds. So we track those and we have to report this to leadership. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about how can we get back to those numbers that were under $1 million a few years ago. Well, there are many ways to do that. And here I have highlighted a few really important ones. Number 1, track funds on a regular basis. As a LIHEAP manager coordinator, you should know how much funds you have received and how much funds have been spent, and you should be communicating this to your fiscal. Communication is the key to having a successful program and ensuring obligations are on track. Number 2, ensure that fiscal data reported in the carryover and reallotment report is consistent with the data reported in the federal financial report. Many times the program manager will submit one report and the fiscal staff will submit the other report. One is saying that, all funds were obligated and the other is stating that they're returning funds. So before submitting those reports, have a meeting, get together, Make sure those numbers are consistent and the data is the same. Number 3, maximize obligations at the beginning of the year if possible. And then number 4, budget less than 10% to carry over. This will allow you to include vendor refunds, refunds from subrecipients, any late federal awards, and any other funds that might remain unobligated or deobligated. That would allow you not to exceed the 10% limit. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for those of you who answered no to the poll question, it was about 4%. Here are some options you can implement now to avoid reallotment. You can issue supplemental benefits or automatic benefits to those already approved in the current fiscal year. You can extend program operation start and end date if you're not operating a year-round program. You can increase your maximum benefit amount, like Kate stated earlier. You can pay electric security deposits or reconnection fees. You can pay past due home energy bills. You can start a new component like a cooling program or a weatherization program. You can also increase weatherization allocation up to 25% with the waiver and many, many other options. So I encourage you to reach out to your program specialist if you're thinking about implementing any or these options and which one will be the best for you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before I end this section, I want to focus on one item that I mentioned earlier. Grant recipients must ensure that the data reported in the final carryover and reallotment report reconcile with the federal financial report. So during this fiscal year, we have seen many reporting discrepancies from grant recipients in the reallotment amounts submitted between the CRR and the FFR. So I invite all of you to identify the root of the problem. To help with that, think about the questions that I have posted here. Once you have identified the problem, consider what you can do to prevent these errors in the future. So some questions to ask yourself are, do you have a policy and procedures in place on who is responsible for submitting these reports? Do you have an SOP that details the steps to submitting these reports? Do you have regular meetings with your fiscal staff? As I mentioned before, this is the key to having a successful program and ensures that your data that you're submitting is accurate. And when was the last time you contacted your OCS regional liaison? We are here to support you. So if you have any questions or if you are in that percent range, please reach out to us. We can help you. We can support you. Again, we want these funds to stay with the community and the people that need it the most. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my section and I'll turn it over to the next speaker, Heather Jones.
Thank you, Doris. Good afternoon. I'm Heather Jones, the Policy Data and Evaluation Branch Chief, and I'm going to review the LIHEAP-weatherization flexibilities. Before this review, we have 3 poll questions for you to answer. So from these poll questions, it looks like a majority, 63%, said they are currently grading their LIHEAP weatherization funding with DOE weatherization funding. And then another 37% do not. And then we have about 19% that are allowing for solar panel installation with LIHEAP weatherization funding and 81% that do not. And then finally, we have about 28% that are considering allowing using LIHEAP bill assistance payment to be utilized for our community's solar subscription fees. So based on these answers, I'm just going to give some overviews about in response to these questions and poll. Next slide, please. The LIHEAP statute and regulation require the coordination between low-income programs, including the U.S. Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program. The coordination is included in Assurance 4 of the LIHEAP statute. Assurance 6 states, to the extent necessary, when designating a local administrative agency, including agencies that receive funds from weatherization programs. The LIHEAP statute allows grant recipients to obligate, as Doris indicated, LIHEAP funds for low-cost residential weatherization or other energy-related repair for low-income households. Each federal fiscal year, grant recipients may obligate up to 15% of funds for LIHEAP weatherization services, or up to 25% with a waiver from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. And grant recipients should seek to create the most flexibility, which this may vary from grant recipient to grant recipient across the country. Rules allow flexibility for grant recipients to run their programs. And in Section 5 of the LIHEAP model plan is where grant recipients can indicate if they wish to use LIHEAP and or DOE weatherization rules. The point of mostly is giving that grant recipient the ability to create their own flexibility where it's needed based on their area needs. And so this is a grant recipient level decision. You may want to review this section of your model plan for next year to consider how you can create the most flexibility in your weatherization program. Next slide, please. The income eligibility threshold, which can be 200% of the federal poverty guidelines if using DOE weatherization rules, or it can be 60% of the state median income, whichever is greater. You may also want to use DOE weatherization program rules to determine if the entire multifamily housing structure will be weatherized. Aligning eligibility allows providers the flexibility to use LIHEAP funds on all WAP projects, even if they come through a different intake process other than LIHEAP. When you select mostly LIHEAP rules, LIHEAP funding is not subject to all the DOE WAP maximum statewide averages or subject to the saving investment ratio. You will also select pre-populated measures and other measures that are specific to your current priorities. And this could include heat pumps, air conditioning replacement, and energy repair related repairs. You'll also want to include any renewable technology that may be a priority within your region, including wind and solar. Next slide, please. A majority of grant recipients follow mostly DOE rules with LIHEAP funds. Here's a look at some of the common exceptions based on the LIHEAP model plans we've reviewed. For the average cost per unit, our understanding is that this ranges from $10,000 to $12,000 as a common limit for the LIHEAP average cost per unit. The savings to investment ratio is where some grant recipients appear to align with their utility program policies. And weatherization, we're encouraging grant recipients to take a variety of approaches, but they may want to align this with the new 15-year rolling date for ease of weatherization implementation with DOE funds. Energy repair and replacement. A growing number of grant recipients are using both LIHEAP traditional grading and waivers to address energy-related repairs, as this may cause deferrals in weatherization. It's important to base your program design on data and set the cost or limits on these repairs. Note, it is not allowable practice for LIHEAP funds to be used for roof repairs, major construction, or land improvement. Grant recipients should indicate in their model plan if they will be participating in community solar. The benefits of community solar can be both environmental and economic. The types of benefits included in the LIHEAP and community solar information memorandum pointed out cost savings. One of the main benefits of community solar subscriptions for people with low income is the potential for the cost savings on their electric bills. Community solar projects offer subscribers a discount on energy produced by the solar panels, which can help to lower their energy costs. This can be especially important for individuals with low income who may struggle to pay their electricity bills. It also gives them access to clean energy. Community solar projects provide access to clean energy sources without the need to own or maintain solar panels. This can be particularly beneficial for low-income people who may live in areas with high levels of pollution or may have health conditions that are exacerbated by air pollution. It also provides support for local communities. By subscribing to the Community Solar Project, individuals with low income can support the development of local renewable energy projects, which can create jobs and stimulate economic growth in their communities. And finally, it allows flexibility. Community solar projects typically offer flexible subscription options, which can be helpful for the individual with low income who have fluctuating income or may need to adjust their energy usage depending on their financial situation. Next slide. The key to all of this and the flexibility that you have about weatherization, whether it's under LIHEAP or DOE rules, is to establish good written policy and procedures and define the exceptions to the DOE rules. This can include LIHEAP allows the defining of health and safety limits, which can be higher than the DOE WAC limit. LIHEAP does not have to follow, as we've mentioned, the SRI, and it can set its standard below 1.0. And cook stove replacements are allowed under LIHEAP, and HVAC replacement is possible using LIHEAP prices, weatherization, heating, and cooling funds. Now I'm handing the presentation over to our next speaker, Nancy Stevens.
Thank you, Heather, and hello, everyone. I'm going to discuss the use of LIHEAP funds during natural disasters. As many of you know, we're seeing more extreme weather lately, like hotter summers, more intense hurricanes and storms, more frequent tornadoes, and more rain leading to floods. Because of these weather changes, we hope that you will find today's discussion of disaster management flexibilities timely and useful. Next slide, please. First, we have another poll question to test your current knowledge about LIHEAP disaster management. For this question, can you please select one answer that is something that cannot be covered using LIHEAP disaster flexibilities? Your choices are blankets, roof replacement, furnace repair, 3-night hotel stay, or all of the above. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you got the correct answer, which is answer B, roof replacement. So many of you may not even need this section of the presentation. Nonetheless, I will go forward and I hope that you'll be able to gain some new or useful information. And just want to make a point about the poll. It was a little bit of a trick question because minor roof repair may be an allowable use of LIHEAP funds, but roof replacement it isn't an appropriate use of LIHEAP funds because it is considered construction, as Heather was just saying, and LIHEAP funds may only be used for minor repairs and not construction. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Next slide, please. So regarding disaster management, our office does attempt to remain aware of natural disasters that are impacting our grant recipients. So if there is a natural disaster in your community, our office may contact you to check on your well-being and remind you that we are available to assist you and to share disaster management flexibilities with you that may be useful to your agency and community. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many weather-related crises these days, we may miss one. And if that does happen, please feel free to reach out to us at any time if needed. Whether we contact you first or you contact us, please be aware that we are available to help you utilize the flexibilities available using your LIHEAP funds. And please remain in contact with your LIHEAP program specialist for guidance and technical assistance as you implement any disaster flexibilities. Next slide, please. So there are several allowable uses of LIHEAP funds. This slide shows the first three that we will discuss today, temporary shelter, transportation, and equipment repair and replacement. So temporary shelter can be used when a home is destroyed or damaged, resulting in a lack of home energy. You can provide vouchers to pay for living expenses. And again, if those expenses are related to a lack of home energy. Regarding transportation, support can be offered to move individuals away from the crisis area to shelter when health and safety is endangered by the loss of access to heating or cooling. And equipment repair and replacement is allowable for things like furnaces, air conditioners, and for insulation. Next slide, please. So this slide contains more allowable uses of LIHEAP funds during a disaster. If you would like to use LIHEAP to set up a cooling or warming center, you can partner with public facilities like local libraries, community centers, and government buildings where people can go to remain warm in the winter and cool in the summer. You can also coordinate with the emergency or first response teams in your area, like ambulance medics and the police, to ensure that they are aware that there are warming and cooling center options available, and encourage them to refer people to those shelters or to take people to the established centers if it's possible. Regarding income eligibility, you can temporarily raise your income eligibility guidelines so that you can allow more people that may have been impacted by a natural disaster to be eligible to receive LIHEAP benefits. So here's how this works. For example, if you're using federal poverty guidelines, you can switch to state median income, which in most cases allows for a higher income. Note that I said in most cases, because there are some instances where this may not be true, such as if the household size is large, like over 8 or 9 people. Therefore, please contact and work with your LIHEAP program specialist for any guidance or assistance if you are interested in using this type of flexibility. Please also remember that if you do make changes to your income eligibility, it may never, under any circumstances, as indicated in LIHEAP regulation, be set to an amount that exceeds the greater of 150% of the HHS poverty guidelines or 60% of the state median income. Next slide, please. So this slide has 3 additional allowable uses of LIHEAP funds, including in-kind and non-cash benefits. What we mean by that are things like blankets, coats, space heaters, fans, or items that will help provide warmth or cooling, as well as utility reconnection costs when access to energy has been impacted. And finally, you can also offer self-attestation. When a natural disaster happens, it can impact the ability of individuals and families to access and provide to your agency the necessary documents that are required for program eligibility determination. So for example, if someone is unable to get to their home or if the documents are damaged during a storm, in these cases, grant recipients and sub-grant recipients can offer flexibilities by allowing clients the opportunity to sign a self-attestation form when documentation is missing or unavailable. If you do find the need to use a self-attestation, we also request that you implement a process for following up with individuals and families once the disaster has passed and they are settled. This is so that you can obtain the needed documentation, because as a LIHEAP grant recipient, whether you are a state, a tribe, or a territory, you are ultimately responsible for determining that clients are eligible for the LIHEAP services they receive. I will upload some files in the chat at the end of today's presentation, and one of those files will be a template of a self-attestation that you can develop for use in your agency. Next slide, please. So now let's quickly go over some of the things that are not allowable uses of LIHEAP funds related to natural disasters. Shelter. As I said earlier, you can provide temporary shelter for short periods of time. However, things like mortgage payments or rental assistance are not allowable unless these are necessary costs to shelter individuals from a crisis situation for a temporary period. Please note that we allow grant recipients to define what time frame they consider to be temporary, as long as the time period isn't excessive or doesn't represent an erroneous interpretation of LIHEAP regulations. Regarding eligibility, please remember that I mentioned on the previous slide that while LIHEAP grant recipients, states, tribes, and territories can offer a temporary increase in their income eligibility and offer self-attestations, grant recipients cannot completely waive eligibility requirements. As I said before, please establish a process or procedures for following up with clients who need to use a self-attestation. Also, clothing or other household supplies are on the list of things that cannot be covered using LIHEAP funds. Where clothing is concerned, the only exception is, as I said earlier, you can cover the cost of coats to provide warmth after a natural disaster, but no other clothing. Water bills and other utilities cannot be covered using LIHEAP funds, even during a natural disaster. Nor can wheelchairs or other personal support items. Ramps, they are considered major construction, and as you've heard, and as I mentioned after the poll question, major construction repairs and projects are not appropriate uses of LIHEAP funds. So ramps like roof repairs, like roof replacements would be another example of an unallowable LIHEAP use of funds. While we understand the value and appreciate that there is a need for many of the expenses on this slide, LIHEAP funds are to be limited to reimbursing costs associated with energy assistance. We suggest that you seek federal or state funds to cover these types of expenses using resources through, say, for instance, CSBG or other government agencies like FEMA or HUD. Next slide, please. I want to point out one important difference related to the timeframes for responding to regular LIHEAP crisis versus natural disasters. As you know, during a crisis, LIHEAP federal regulation requires that grant recipients provide a response of 48 hours for regular crisis situations and 18 hours if there is a life-threatening crisis. Please be advised that in the case of a natural disaster, you can use your crisis funds, and because a natural disaster is involved, you can respond within a reasonable time frame. That means you may utilize more time to respond than the regular 18 or 48 hours because of delays associated with the natural disaster that has occurred. In these cases, we would like for you to remain mindful of the intent of the 18 or 48-hour requirement. That intent is that you respond as quickly as possible to alleviate any danger or crisis. Next slide, please. So there are several LIHEAP grant recipients, both states and tribes, that have developed their own disaster policy. With the impact of weather-related disasters increasing, as we said, you may want to develop a policy for your agency if you don't already have one. At the end of today's presentation, I will upload some example policies in the chat box for each of the LIHEAP grant recipients listed on this slide. You will find a policy for Arkansas, California. There'll be 2 files for Florida, the Kickapoo Tribe of Oklahoma, and Louisiana. I will also include in the chat box 2 templates that can be used to develop your own policy. There is one template that I'll upload for states and one for tribes. You can use these examples to guide your disaster policy development efforts. Next slide, please. So one last piece of guidance about using LIHEAP funds during a natural disaster. Please remember that if you make any changes to your LIHEAP activities, such as adding disaster flexibilities, your LIHEAP model plan needs to be updated to include any new activities. As with all changes to your LIHEAP plan revisions do not need prior approval from our office. They should be submitted in OLDC within a reasonable time after the change is made or new activity is implemented, and by no later than the end of the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. Next slide, please. In closing, This slide lists some key resources related to natural disasters and the use of LIHEAP funds. I want to point out two of the resources on this slide. First, the heap.gov website, which is the fourth bullet on the slide. Heap.gov is a federal effort that includes resources related to extreme heat, which are very important right now at this time of year. The next resource is the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response website. It is an HHS effort that offers an opportunity that is available in most states, if not all, to connect with a volunteer network during emergencies and natural disasters. And one reminder, I will paste the template files and the policy examples in the chat box at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll pass the presentation to Vicki Pratlow.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. In this section, we'll briefly cover some of the flexibilities related to state-tribe agreements. Next slide. First, we'll do a little check to gauge everyone's familiarity with the topic. So please respond to this question. True or false, state-tribe agreements are required for tribes and tribal organizations to receive direct LIHEAP funding. Okay. So it looks like the majority of the responses are yes. We're at about 65% say yes. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the topic to get some more clarity on the issue. Next slide, please. State-tribe agreements, which are also known as intergovernmental agreements, very simply are agreements which outline a number of factors for the operation of distinct entities within the same geographic location. And to officially answer the poll question, no, they are not required for tribes and tribal organizations to receive direct LIHEAP funding. They are strongly encouraged, however, and once they're reached, these agreements are binding and enforceable. Each party to the agreement has responsibilities included in it and should fulfill the terms as agreed upon. And although each agreement is different and it's tailored to the individual parties, there are some common advantages of state-tribe agreements. For example, they can help to ensure mutually agreeable LIHEAP allocations for the tribes. They can help to identify the tribe's service territory, help to prevent duplication of services, facilitate data exchange between the states and the tribes, and also can help to create a process for resolving any disputes that might occur. Next slide. So to start off, we'll spend a little time on the first benefit of these agreements, which is ensuring mutually agreeable allocations for tribal programs. And this speaks directly to the methodology that we use to come up with the funding for tribal programs. There are two ways for this to happen. We can get an allocation amount either without a state-tribe agreement or with one in place. Now, without a state-tribe agreement, OCS determines tribal allocations using a calculation, which works as follows. First, we determine the number of eligible tribal households, and to do this, we use counts from the American Community Survey, or ACS. Once we have that number, we calculate the ratio of eligible tribal households as compared to the number of eligible households in the state, and this gives us our multiplier. And then finally, we calculate the tribal allocation by multiplying the state's funding allocation by the multiplier. So for example, just using simple round numbers, if there are 1,000 eligible tribal households, according to the ACS, and there are 100,000 eligible state households, we divide 1,000 by 100,000 to get 0.01 or 1%. And if the state's allocation is $2 million, then we multiply that amount by 0.01, and that gives us the tribe's allocation of $20,000. There's some issues with this method, mainly that the ACS may not accurately count tribal households, which could leave the tribe with a lower allocation than necessary to serve their LIHEAP eligible clients. Next slide. The next method to come up with the allocation is when there is a tribe state agreement in place. And in this case, OCS will use the terms of the agreement to determine the tribe's allocation. One of the main benefits of this method is that it can give the tribe an opportunity to negotiate a more accurate allocation. Also, tribal programs should not worry about any possibility that entering into one of these agreements would reduce their allocation, because these agreements must grant tribes at least as much as they would get under the ACS figures. It must be noted, however, that once negotiations are complete, if the agreement does not grant the tribe more than the default allocation, then all of the other terms in the agreement are still valid. So that calculation would not invalidate any other parts of the agreement. Next slide. So when we're talking about negotiating a more accurate allocation to include in the agreement, there are some flexibilities that exist with determining that allocation amount. There's the option to use a fixed amount or fixed percentage of the state's allocation, or a household count that both parties have agreed to. You could also develop the agreement based on the historical number of households that have been served in the past, or tribal estimates based on tribal enrollment numbers, or even the number of households that have been counted for other social service programs, such as a HUD housing program. It should also be noted that this is not an exhaustive list, because you can really use any other mutually acceptable method to determine the allocation amount in the agreement. Next slide. So besides calculating a tribe's allocation, there are other flexibilities that exist in the development of an agreement. Some of the other components that are flexible include the duration of the agreement. This could be for 1 year, it could be for multiple years, or an indefinite period of time. It's important to think carefully, though, about this, because different arrangements may make more sense based on local conditions. And once an agreement is reached on the duration, there's also the possibility to extend the agreement or renegotiate the agreement before it expires. This process would mean that both parties would come back together to discuss the terms, or to at least confirm that the current terms are still good. Next. There is also flexibility in identifying the tribe's service territory. The tribe's service territory can be designated in a number of ways, which can include using the boundaries of the reservation. It could be any trust lands that are off the reservation, or it might be specific areas outside of the reservation where there is a significant tribal presence. Or it can even be specified using particular zip codes, cities, or the names of counties. Next. There are flexibilities that also exist in defining the types of households to be served by the tribe. This could mean that all households within the service area, regardless of race, will be served, or all households where the head of the household, any adult, or any other household member is American Indian or Alaska Native, an enrolled tribal member, or a tribal member who may not be enrolled. Next. Another component that should be included in the agreement, where there is some flexibility, is in the process for avoiding duplication of benefits. And this is a component that both the state and the tribe are responsible for ensuring. There is no duplication of benefits between the two programs, or at least there should be none. State-tribe agreement should specify what information the states and the tribes will share, how they will share that information, and the frequency with which they will share that information. For example, states and/or tribes can share a client database or grant view-only rights to double-check clients served. Tribes can even have a partnership in place with a local state agency in their immediate vicinity to establish a process of calling or faxing each other to double-check client information. And engaging with a local state office might facilitate a more timely process. Next slide. And lastly, OCS is shining a bit of a spotlight on this subject. And so we wanted to provide a little bit of an update on what our office is doing regarding intergovernmental agreements. First, currently our office is developing an information memorandum. It's going through an approval process right now, but we expect to release it soon. This IM will provide some of the same information that's been presented here and some other information regarding these agreements. We also plan to put all of the agreements that we have in our records online for review and comment. And once the IM is released and the agreements are posted, our expectation is that it will spark a conversation between parties to the agreements to renegotiate or just simply to make sure everyone is on the same page as to what's in place and how we in OCS calculate the travel allocations for the programs that already have agreements in place. We are also going to make template agreements available as an attachment to the IM. But if you're interested, you can always reach out to your program specialist to get a copy of a template. You're free to use the templates as a jumping off point to initiate agreements where one does not exist, or use them as a way to analyze your current agreement to see if renegotiation is necessary. And then finally, we have some resources here in this presentation, but there are others on our website. You just have to do a search for them. What we have here is a link to some current or active intergovernmental agreements, which you can use as examples to see the kinds of things that are included. This link is to our LIHEAP clearinghouse. The next resource is a YouTube video, which was presented at the last NUAC conference, well, in 2023 NUAC conference on this topic. And we also have a link to the specific section in the grantee resource guide where you'll find information related to this topic. And finally, as always, your program liaison is available if you want to discuss this further, or if you want to get the conversation started with your state or tribal counterpart. And with that, I'll hand it over to our next presenter to continue with the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Dalgleish, and I'm one of the new program specialists with the LIHEAP team. Before we move to our Q&A portion of the presentation, I wanted to quickly review available resources. After our presentation, this PowerPoint will be made available to you, and I highly encourage you to review the links on this slide and the resources shared on previous slides. In addition, please take a look at the disaster management resources that Nancy will share in the chat. One resource in particular that I wanted to review is the LIHEAP tools.
Good morning or afternoon.
Caroline, if you wouldn't mind pulling that up. So this resource, whether you're new to LIHEAP or you just need a refresher, is a great resource that I encourage you all to bookmark. And it covers all aspects of program administration, including reporting, monitoring, policy issues, and outreach. So again, I highly encourage you to review this and all the other resources that will be made available to you after this presentation. I'll now hand it over to Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. So I wanted to give a quick reminder to everyone. You've heard this a few times already, but we are recording this presentation. So both the recording and the slides, as well as the resources that have been mentioned, will all be available to you after the presentation. Thank you for everybody who's already put some questions in the chat. I see that several of them have already been answered by my teammates, but we want to make sure to leave this webinar open for at least a couple minutes longer so that you all can get in any of your pressing questions that you may have. No question is too small. I will say if we're unable to answer it right now for whatever reason, we do have team members taking notes and somebody will definitely follow up with you. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of mute myself now, hang out in the background, and we're all just going to kind of monitor that Q&A chat. So please continue to put your questions in there. Thank you. I think somebody asked a very good and not at all silly question, but are the terms program specialist and regional liaison interchangeable to describe OCS positions, different terms for the same position? Thank you for asking. It was not a silly question, actually. Team, interchangeable, different things?
Yes, the answer is yes.
I see another question in the chat about could state tribe agreements cover all members of a tribe throughout the state? And the answer to that is yes. Let's say, your tribe agreements in the section where you talk about households that will be served, you can choose a geographical area or any member of your tribe. You can get very specific and nuanced in those state tribe agreements. Blankets, are they an allowable use of LIHEAP funds? The answer to that is yes. Blankets in a crisis situation may be a good intervention until a more permanent intervention could be provided. Blankets could also be provided in if you have a disaster flexibilities policy, if you'd like to create a LIHEAP disaster flexibilities policy, blankets might be a great option to provide in an ice storm, for instance, when electricity is out until a more permanent resolution can be reached. Ben Johnson wants to know if we can email the PowerPoint. Yes, we'd be happy to email it to you when we get it posted to our website as 508 compliant. Ben, we'll make sure that we send out an email to alert everyone that it's been posted.
Also, looks like Ben Johnson also has a question about getting some orientation and additional information since it's new. So Doris, I believe, is answering the question through the chat line.
Don't be shy, y'all. Please continue to, put your questions in here and our team will continue to answer them. Thank you for all these great questions already. I see a lot of them have already been answered directly by my colleagues in here. So that's great.
I see a question here about do people automatically qualify with SSI, TANF? Do they have to follow the income guidelines? Okay, so this is sort of a complex question, a complex answer. If someone in the household receives SSI or TANF, the whole household becomes eligible for LIHEAP if you're doing categorical eligibility and you do categorical eligibility for those two categories, SSI and TANF. And then at that point, you would have to check their income to see the household income to see what benefits they would qualify for. So I know that sounds a little, it's a little complex, but if one person in the household has one of those benefits, you might have a policy in place that allows them to be income eligible, but you would still need the whole household's income to determine their benefit. I hope that helps clarify a little bit.
Caroline, I think there is a question I was just saying on the chat line about air conditioning, which I think I answered. But it's worth giving. I think it's a good question.
Oh yeah, I see that here. Somebody asked, when it comes to air conditioning units, should that be under weatherization or can it be purchased under LIHEAP? Heather Jones answered that and said, air conditioning units can fall under LIHEAP weatherization, crisis assistance, and cooling assistance program funds.
I think there was also a question about whether all states have an air conditioning program or not. And I did answer that to the chat line. I think the clarification here is it depends on the state, because we know that not all states have a cooling assistance program or air conditioning program funded through LIHEAP, but it's possible that states that don't use LIHEAP funds for cooling assistance, there might be other funding available for AC program or some kind of a crisis program. And then that there are a group of states where they do not run a cooling assistance program, but they might be able to offer AC as a crisis mitigation situation. And obviously ACs are a qualified use of funds during natural disaster, especially during extreme heat situation. So it's a mostly a state by state situation.
Here's a question from someone asking if there's any guidance on model plan amendments. Examples are for a disaster, updated or amending a tribal state agreement, or a new online application becoming available for LIHEAP or weatherization services. So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but there is, so the guidance on model plan amendments for a disaster are within a reasonable amount of time of making the change. So you don't need our prior approval. If you have a natural disaster and you decide to write a disaster policy that day, or change your crisis benefits that day, or some other aspect of your program, you don't need prior approval from our office for that. You can do that and then just update your plan within a reasonable amount of time, but no later than September 30th of that year. And you can amend your state tribal agreement at any time throughout the year. That's something that's just a negotiation between the tribe and the state that the tribe resides in. So either party can initiate that exchange or that revision, and the other party to the agreement would just need to agree and sign the new agreement. I hope that helps answer some of that question. It looks like Heather's posted a further YouTube video on that.
There is also a really good question about But priority population, I guess the question was whether it's a requirement to prioritize certain type of households. It's not a federal requirement. However, the federal law allows the grant recipient to prioritize certain population, as we discussed today. We encourage to look at priority population, encourage you to look at priority population from an outreach standpoint, how quickly you can issue benefits to them as well as benefit amounts. But again, it is not a federal requirement. We leave it up to our grant recipient to make that decision.
These have all been some really good questions, and I'm not sure how much time we have to keep answering all of them. But I do think that we can make note of these and try to get some responses to the attendees today that have asked these questions, because some of these are pretty lengthy discussions and may involve further discussion about the specifics of that, of kind of the impetus of the question.
Yes, that's a very good point. I think we are going to wrap up the webinar fairly soon, but we are taking notes of all of the unanswered question and answered question, and we'll look at options to share responses either directly to all of you or through a Q&A type of communication. We'll make sure that all the questions get answered. I can promise that.
All right, folks, I'm going to ask my team to hang on for just another minute to make sure we've kind of taken down any notes we might need to be able to get answers to these questions that we weren't able to answer here today. But with that, it concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to continuing to work with all of you. And as stated earlier, please do not hesitate to reach out to your program specialist with any further questions or concerns that might arise. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.